Welcome back to the show, y'all. TAIJ. Thank Allah it is Juma. Man, I have kind of a hilarious and maybe a little bit spicy of a topic today. We're going to explore some fantastic, definitely effective or top tier video memes created by AI coming out of China that on the surface are incredibly hilarious, but there's some sinister divisiveness going on that I want us to explore. And we're going to tie that into a fantastic article that is a reflection of the hands off protest from the weekend. It is written by a guy named Jonathan Smucker and published in The Guardian. So without further ado, let's jump right into and then break down these Chinese video memes that are making a caricature of MAGA supporters, and Trump vis-a-vis the trade war that they're starting with China. Let's go. Here you got people just eating while they're working, making Nikes, throwing up a hamburger. Some guy with a drill on a Tesla. Um, all of these sweaty, overweight white people doing typically, jobs that Americans think of Chinese folks doing, the Nvidia chips here. And then watch this top tier trolling here. All of those um, logos from the companies falling down. It's kind of hilarious. Now, let's take a look at this one. You got farm workers coming out, um, a troll on the Trump hat, the Tesla with potato. You see, it's an African American freedom monitor looking over the workers. Um, and you got these people picking corn. Great America Freedom tastes better with a vlogger, um, and then keep America hungry, even though they're all fat. Guys, this is top tier trolling coming out of China. Clearly, the Chinese people behind these memes understand the divisions and the caricatures of America way better than we do of them. But here's the sinister part, guys. Again, this isn't just me as a white presenting person. Talking here. This is actually about strategy. One of the things that I always talk about, and there's a book here that you can see over my shoulder called Us Plus Them. And then just underneath it, slightly over to the middle, is a book called Words That Work. And these books are very, very instructive on outreach, on public relations. And the Words That Work in particular is by Frank Lutz. He's a PhD, and he's the one who does so much of the polling and strategy, both for the Nation of Israel, for Fox News, and for conservatives. But one key point that he says that is absolutely true and that is incredibly effective that we have to keep in mind as people who are communicating, who are advocating for the Constitution, for the First Amendment, the Bill of Rights, is that once you say something, once you create a sign, once you hit publish or post on that social media, once that goes out, communication is ultimately an act of surrender. Once the words leave your mouth, you can't control how someone interprets or understands them. Now, there's a famous saying, I use it all the time. I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. I think it's hilarious. It's kind of snarky. That's just kind of on brand for me. But the problem is that these Chinese video memes, while they're hilarious, they're really designed to take everybody angry at Trump and create a division that is something that I think is good for the protest movement. But ultimately, and I'm going to put up the picture here, but I'm going to describe it just in case I can't find it. There's a great cartoon where it has a boat sinking and it has all the masses of people on one side and a few people on the top. And the masses on the one side, this more going into the water, have buckets and they're trying to keep a hole from flooding the whole boat. And it's clearly sinking because the boat started to tilt and maybe capsize is the right phrase. And the people at the top are sitting there kind of smugly saying, I'm so glad we're on the part of the boat that doesn't have the hole in it. Not realizing, of course, that the entire boat is going to sink regardless. And if you are living in America, especially if you're an American citizen, we're all in the same boat. Whether we like it or not, the MAGA supporters, the anti-MAGA supporters, the Republicans, Democrats, Independents, all of us are in this country together. Now, I'm not saying we got to sing Kumbaya with bigots and fascists and authoritarians. No, what I'm saying is we have a duty to bring as many people to the side of being anti-authoritarian to going back to the checks and balances of power, to reinstating innocent until proven guilty in due process, and especially to reviving the Bill of Rights and protecting and restoring the First Amendment. The fact of the matter is, just hating the other side is not going to get us to a more peaceful future for our children and our children's children. Instead, what that's going to do is perpetuate the conflict. So I want us to really look at this article from The Guardian. Now, I'm going to bring up the picture of it so you'll know. I will include the link to the full article, but I'm going to read just a few snippets from it that I think are key to this idea of message strategy and the responsibility for advocates and protesters to keep that in mind. Now, you can see the title there, but let's get straight into the first paragraph because it sets the stage very effectively. And then I want to get into some selected clips from the article that I think make a profound point that we should all reflect on. Jonathan Smucker writes, on Saturday, I was heartened to be one of millions of Americans who took to the streets in cities and towns across the United States to stand against, and this is him in a quote, the most brazen power grab in modern history. And I co sign that quote 100%. While no official total tally of the hands off participation is yet available, the anti-Donald Trump, anti-Elon Musk actions on Saturday were certainly amongst the largest single-day protest in U.S. history, with rallies in all 50 states. Sadly, I didn't participate and I wasn't there, but I'm relying on this person's observations and my own observations from protests in the past. Now, if any of you follow me on social media, you know that I often kind of deride or devalue protest in one specific instance. In the instance that it is the whole of activism for some people. They go, they protest, they shout, they feel like they stuck it to the man, they go home and they never vote, they don't do anything else. Those types of people, to me, are part of the problem. Now, Jonathan in the article doesn't go that far, but he does make some amazing points. And he starts off how Trump frames protesters is rife with peril. When powerful people and institutions feel threatened, they tend to fight dirty, using every tool at their disposal, including police and legal repression. This is exactly what we're seeing from the administration. He continues, in addition to facing threats to safety and freedom, social movement participants are characteristically slandered and stereotyped by their opponents, with slanted news coverage often parroting the message or the shared assumptions of the ruling class. This is such an important point. Before exploring some possible pitfalls of protest and how to avoid them, let's get a few things clear. And I wanted to include this paragraph because I co-sign it 100%. First, it is brave and worthy to engage in protest for just causes against powerful actors. Not only that, it is necessary if we want to have a democracy. That speaks so much to my First Amendment focus. Jonathan continues, second, our opponents have a vested interest in disparaging and caricaturing our protest, and they will attempt to slander us no matter what we do. Then he states, and this is so important, but this doesn't mean we have no ability to counter their attacks. Third, Jonathan writes, peril and pitfalls cannot be completely avoided. A protest where everything goes perfectly is rare. I would add almost non-existent. Then he continues, and the likelihood of errors and excess is a poor excuse for inaction. Man, that's such a good point. Now, we're starting to get into the deep of it. He goes, that said, organizers of protest have a responsibility to do everything in their power to ensure that the collective action is effective as possible. Here's where we insert messaging, y'all. Remember, I said communication is an act of surrender. How you say something is ultimately going to be understood with the baggage and the preconceived connotations and everything of the person hearing it. So vastly different from demographic to demographic. But that doesn't mean you can't do your best to make the message as clear as possible. Now, Jonathan continues and he quotes a sociologist named Max Weber who argued that those who seek to intervene in politics have a responsibility not only for our own intentions, but also for the counter responses to our actions. In other words, we have a responsibility to think a few chess moves ahead and to craft a strategy that can win. Guys, that's so important. Jonathan continues, A central constraint today is the dominant narrative about protest itself. In the US, this narrative casts protesters as a special type of person with some combination of the following: people who are loud, shrill, naive, countercultural, speaking in jargon, Marxists, anti American, violent, and economically uneducated, or, and this is kind of contradictory, or economically and educationally privileged. And this is the one Trump uses. He calls protesters elitists. Now, Jonathan writes, the purpose of this dominant narrative is straightforward. It's to inoculate millions of Americans against protest movements by otherizing the protesters. In other words, there's a well-worn caricature of a protester that holds many everyday working people back from aligning with protest movements. Ultimately, it's on us to get more people to see us differently. Guys, I've been saying this to the American Muslim community for decades. To be clear, Jonathan writes, I am not talking about our hard opponents. The point of protest is never to be palatable to everyone. I'm talking here about the millions of Americans who have a high potential to join, support, or at least sympathize with protest movements. Word, Jonathan, word. I can't agree enough. Now, this gets into an interesting part here where he starts to break down Trump's framing and how to counter it. So we'll continue. Jonathan writes, Trump's framing is effective because it taps into real and deepening class-based culture divides in America between a highly educated professional class occupying anywhere from the top 10 to 20% of the spectrum of America and separate from the bottom 80%. And then Jonathan cites a book here called Dream Hoarders by Richard Reeves. And in the book, Reeves lays out how this upper spectrum of people has pulled away from the majority of Americans, not just economically, but socially and culturally. The complex US tax code, legacy college admissions, and housing, as well as zoning and other policies, have benefited the already advantaged. Now, here's where I'm going to go into a little story and where the people who kind of smugly were like, all you anti-genocide voters, you deserve to be deported. All you Latinos for Trump, you deserve to be sent to El Salvador prisons. All you, just on and on. You get what I'm talking about. The smug neoliberal, the corporate Democrat who wants to control everybody, thinks they're entitled enough to tell us how we should vote. And the predominantly white people and very often white women who tell people from minority communities what's in their own interest instead of listening. There's a lot of y'all, and I don't care if I'm offending you. You guys got to listen to the rest of this article. It gets really, really pointed at a elite class of people who see themselves as progressive and see themselves as the right on being on the right side of issues, but also have a huge tendency to talk down to and look down to people who they think they're trying to help. So back to Jonathan's article. As distinct from the ultra rich 1%, many in this larger upper strata see themselves as progressives, even as they benefit from invisible moats around their neighborhoods, schools, and social networks. Invisible moats of privilege, I'm adding that, around their neighborhoods, schools, and social networks. Essentially, they're not in touch with the 80%. They don't know anyone there. And then when they do encounter people, often they extrapolate that encounter, whether it's good or bad, onto the masses, and they kind of ignore the diversity of the 80%. This deepening class-based insularity, Jonathan continues, creates the cultural disconnect that Trump exploits. He directs populist anger towards these cultural elites while diverting attention away from far more powerful and destructive economic culprits, offering working class Americans cultural revenge rather than policies that could make a real positive difference in their lives. Now, this point is so crucial, but understanding that this is also the talking point that often leads us to talk down to other people. It's like y'all are voting for things that aren't even in your own interest. If someone told you that and basically called you stupid by saying it that way, especially depending on how you say it, is that a message that's going to resonate with someone you're trying to reach? I've never been browbeaten into agreement before, so I don't know about you, but I think we have to reframe the way we counter and interact with people who don't see things the way we see them. In fact, a really good friend of mine named Kamal actually had a post up this morning talking about how to center the human behind a Facebook post, behind a social media post, behind a tweet, and behind a statement you might disagree with, and making sure you look at them as a person first and foremost, or if you can't, at least as a person instead of just their opinion on politics or whatever that you disagree with. Now, back to the article. Trump's exploitation of this cultural economic backdrop, and here's the key, and Democrats' failure to even comprehend it, let alone come up with a counter strategy, was central to his election victories in both 2016 and 2024. And I'm going to repeat that. Democrats' failure to even comprehend it, let alone come up with a counter strategy. That line right there explains why you're seeing so many hard neoliberals who are now like, maybe Bernie was right. You think? You think maybe running for something and actual on policies that help people might be better than slapping people around, telling them, like Biden said, you ain't black if you don't vote for me, and all the other faux pas, or the right now I'm talking yas queen moments of Kamala Harris. Maybe we should really evaluate who we're putting forward and how they speak to people. Anyway, not too much of a rant, getting back to the article. This same backdrop should also be of great concern to protest movements. We who are attempting to organize people into collective action must recognize how easily our movements can be portrayed as extensions of this privileged class and work intentionally to break out of that framing. And then the article writes this, not me. The author says, Jonathan says, and sometimes that reality. So, yes, a lot of the people who are at the protest are part of that 20% privileged class who look down on the 80% of the nation. And I always tell this to the American Muslim community because there's a lot of frustration with our foreign policy and now our domestic policy. You're not going to fix a nation that you don't care for, that you don't love. And in no way am I saying that American Muslims don't love the United States. They do. And a point here that needs to be said, people who fearmonger on our community, who are always talking about how much of a threat we are, of how much Islam is creeping Sharia law and going to take away people's freedoms and all that kind of stuff. First and foremost, that's ridiculous. We're barely 1% of the overall population. And if you have such little confidence in your government or in your own faith or in your own way of life that you think 1% can take control of you, you got more problems than American Muslims. But more importantly, just think about all the fear mongering and think about the reality. American Muslims are some of the most law abiding, charitable, diverse people in America, the most giving, most law abiding, highly professional, highly educated people in the community. We're not all highly educated, highly professional. A lot of us are in lower income brackets. But at the end of the day, we're very diverse. But the one thing that diversity you wouldn't expect from is how incredibly low the crime rate is. And if you were thinking we were these crazy radicals, how few and far between any real attacks against Americans for any reason, terrorism or anything else, actually come out of the American Muslim community. The fear and the hype is way overblown. Now, off of that little tangent, back to the article. At Trump rallies during his 2016 campaign, I observed how he would deliberately draw attention to protesters, utilizing them as characters in his story. He would encourage the crowd to chant and jeer as security removed disruptive outside agitators. So it was striking to watch how dramatically Trump changed his track and his tune when military veterans spoke out at some of these same rallies. Trump completely ignored them. He refused to acknowledge their presence, and strategically, he avoided even looking in their direction. Jonathan continues, these veterans later learned from active duty friends that Trump had gotten quite upset by their actions because they didn't fit into his narrative. Military veterans could easily overcome Trump's woke protester framing. And that's the challenge, guys. Back to Jonathan's words. The lesson isn't that you have to be a military veteran or a federal worker if you want to effectively protest against Trump and Musk. But if our opponents are determined to otherize us as unrelatable, quote unquote, protesters, what are the familiar aspects of our identities that we can emphasize instead? The story of a worker who is so fed up that she decides to join with others in collective action is very different than the dominant story about generic protesters. A central reason we got into this mess is that Democrats have been so tepid and inconsistent in picking visible fights with billionaires, Wall Street, and corporate power. Do you see what I'm saying here? I'm saying what Jonathan is saying. He just made the claim that Democrats either have avoided, inconsistently attacked, or completely tiptoed around talking about big money influence, lobbyists. He says it as fights with billionaires. I'm expanding that. He says fights with billionaires, Wall Street, and corporate power. I am going a little further and saying corporate Democrats at the national level are almost the party of billionaires, Wall Street, and corporate power. And I believe that they're basically better than MAGA, but not by a whole lot. It's more of a slow burn with corporate Democrats, and MAGA's, a five-alarm fire exploding in your face. Now, Jonathan wraps this up saying it is important that we consistently punch up at billionaires and the politicians doing their bidding and refrain from punching down at people who voted for Trump. I know that last line is hard, but if you're punching down at the 80%, you're not expanding your movement. You're exacerbating the divisions, just like the Chinese memes are doing. A nation divided will ultimately fall. Some of y'all may want that, but I live here. I'm an American. I believe in the US Constitution, and I believe that there are values that this country represents, or at least used to, that are worth fighting for and restoring. Those values include due process, the rule of law. They include the First Amendment. They include the Bill of Rights. They include the ability for us to be self-critical and for us to build, by doing better, a better future for our children and our children's children. Now, I want to finish with two more paragraphs from the article because it's fantastic. And again, I'm linking to the full article in the description. I encourage you all to go read it. To break out of Trump's story of the smug and condescending affluent liberal protester, we should avoid messages that are indeed smug and condescending. For example, in this house, we believe science is real. Those signs are pretty smug. Or that mock people for their economic struggles. For example, how are you feeling about voting for cheaper eggs now? Or me adding to the article, I hope you get sent to Gaza for your voting for Trump. That's real. I saw a ton of people posting similar stuff. Jonathan concludes this paragraph with, such messages are self-indulgent and counterproductive, and we can do so much better. Guys, this article is like breathing, life into me at a time when I'm having increasing encounters with corporate Democrats and smug liberals on my social media, talking down to me, accusing me of being a pro-Trumper when I have over 2 decades of history being professional and volunteer work against authoritarianism, against bigotry of all forms, pro First Amendment, pro the American Muslim community, pro equal rights before the law for all people in the United States. Again, I just want to say, please go read the article. Please think twice before you share these memes that would have the possibility to further divide our country. And one of the things that I wanted to just conclude with the story, because I've seen this happen amongst my own children, but a lot at community events with American Muslims, when they say Americans, very often they're meaning white people. And in their mind, it's probably that same caricature of these Chinese memes of the overweight MAGA person, ignorant. And again, hats off to the creators of those internet memes. They are top tier. But to all of us, think about what that messaging means and think about the reality that we're going to have to expand our base in order to take back the Senate and the House, to be able to do anything effectively against the Trump administration. It's a 2-year struggle, y'all, that starts now. We need people to run for office at all levels, starting now, basically the off-year election this year and next year. And we need to build momentum from that by registering everyone possible to vote, all legal voters, and then using the off-year elections as a way to build momentum to vote blue no matter who, except I changed that slogan to vote blue except you know who. And my exceptions are Democrats who voted for limiting free speech, who voted for genocide, who voted for many of the Trump appointees out of fear. We need to be sophisticated. We need to employ split ticket voting, and we need to make sure ultimately that we make Trump have opposition in the House and Senate to the extent possible. In that, I will be your ally. And I hope with that, you have a great weekend. Thank you so much for watching. please share and support this video by liking it, sending it to, let's go for 5 friends, and get them to comment below so I know what you're thinking, and let me know where I'm wrong. I got to learn as well. This is a journey we're taking together. God bless you all. Have a great weekend.
Asa. Okay. Asa? Yes. Asa Galloway.
Asa Galloway defines the mission.
Kind of a show that will put people on the edge of their seat.
Because it leads to the future with a more sophisticated approach.